So I think in the interest of time and to make sure we have lots of time for question and answers, we'll get started. My name is Lee Wolf. I am Interim Director of Teaching and Learning here at UCD, and it is my absolute honor to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Marie Heath, who is Chair of Education Specialties, Associate Professor of Learning Design and Technology, and Faculty Associate at the Center for Research and Evaluation at Loyola University. She's also the co-founder and co-executive director of one of my favorite projects of all time, the Civics of Technology project, and I'm sure she'll talk a bit about that today if you haven't heard of it. And she recently released a book co-authored with Dr. Stephanie Smith-Budai from Harvard Educational Press called Critical AI in K-12 Classrooms, which offers practical guidance for cultivating joy and justice in educational technology. And just last week, I believe, she and her fellow co-author, Dr. Melissa War, accepted the award for the Martin Huberman Outstanding Journal of Teacher Education Article of the Award for the year. And that article was uncovering the hidden curriculum of generative AI, reflective technology audit for teacher educators. So Marie is sort of my go-to person to look for anything and all guidance when it comes to thinking about and wrapping our heads around using or not using generative AI. So really looking forward to chatting with you today, Marie, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Oh, that was such a kind introduction. Thank you, Lee. I am going to share my screen just for a moment with you all. Hopefully you can see the slides now. Does that look okay for you all? Great. So I'll say good morning because where I am in Baltimore, Maryland, in the US, it's morning, but I think it's good afternoon for all of you. So it is so nice to be here with you. And I often like to say that I'm Marie Heath human because sometimes I think like I wonder about how the level of like machine extensions I have. Like I have my phone that is often with me. But even when it's not, I sometimes think I feel it vibrating on my person. I don't know if you have this. So that's like connection to human and machines is a thing that I'm often thinking about because I literally can feel it on me even when it's not. And as Lee noted, all of the sort of positions that I've held, one of the things that I'll also share is that before I went into higher education, I was a secondary social studies teacher here in the States. And so what that means is that I taught courses around history and government and political science, all with this goal of citizenship, an emphasis on citizenship and what it means to develop as a member of a community with commitments towards an inclusive democracy. And all of that kind of experience influences how I think about technology and education. And it's kind of from that lens that I'd like us to be able to play with the question, should educators trust AI machines? And I know that Betteridge's Law of Headline says any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered with the word no. And to be fair, we'll explore that no in the first part of this talk, but in the second, hopefully we'll work through a framework that can just help us make wise decisions as we think about how to include machines or not, or how we want to invite machines into education with us. So I have a background in technology and education, and I'm a person who's excited by the possibilities of making learning more accessible. And I've found, a lot of appeal in technology and education. But I am also a person who is alive in 2026. I'm old enough to remember when Google said, don't be evil. I'm old enough to remember when we thought social media would like connect the world. And I'm old enough to remember when Facebook said they wouldn't put ads on Facebook. So like I am really mindful of the impacts of surveillance technology, the rise of tech billionaires who are prioritizing profit and power over people. And that means I have also some hesitation about trusting machines in education. So I'm hoping this morning we'll just like keep coming back to this idea of should educators trust machines and what we want to do with that. And I'm going to start by sharing my philosophy of education a little bit and my thoughts about technology. And so I love this quote from The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And this is a character, her father's talking to her, and he's kind of like the leader of their crew, and he's trying to pass on some of his wisdom. And he says to her, It's better to teach people than to scare them. If you scare them and nothing happens, they lose their fear and you lose some of your authority with them. It's harder to scare them a second time, harder to teach them, harder to win back their trust. Best to begin by teaching. And not only do I love this book because Octavia Butler is so terrifyingly like prescient about, future dystopia, but also because I like that idea of beginning by teaching instead of beginning by telling, right? And so asking questions, even though we started with this question, should we trust machines, is sort of the way that I work with my students. It's the ways that I work with my own children. It's the ways that I try to address everything. And the thing is that this is like a very human approach, right? To begin by teaching requires like space for nuance, space for civil deliberation, for empathy and perspective taking. It takes time to begin by teaching. And I also think it's very human, right? It's something that happens in relationship with others. It's like happens in here, like in your blood and your bones, and it happens in community. So I keep all of that kind of in my approach. And then the other thing that I'll share is from the Civics of Technology project, which really situates how I think about technology. And what we say on our website, which I've got down there, if you don't need to visit it now, but if you're interested, you can, is that technologies are not neutral and neither are the societies into which they're introduced. As technology continues encroaching in our lives, how can we advance technology education for just futures? So those things together uh, sort of drive my approach to scholarship, my approach to teaching, and what we'll do today. So, beginning by teaching, my wonder for you all is what's your like comfort level with how ChatGPT or large language models in general, like how they work. So if you're like, oh yeah, I think I understand them really well, you're probably a 3. If you're like, I don't understand them at all, but I know that I can do stuff with them, you're a 1. And maybe you're in the middle somewhere, you have like, I think I know how they like come up with their answers, you're a 2. And I would love it if you would just maybe in the chat, since I know some folks have their screens off, if you could just like tell me, do you think you're a 1? Don't know, a 2 sort of know, or 3 like yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'd love to just see where folks feel. Okay, awesome. We got some 2s, a lot of 2s. That's probably where I am too. 1, lovely. Thank you for sharing. Oh, I like the 2 with the exclamation point. A strong 2. Excellent. Oh, uh-oh. I feel like I'm going to be nervous now. I've got a 3. All right, fabulous. So I think that one of the things that is uh, that like I know conceptually, right? That this machine uses probability, but it's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around. Even though, I've read about how algorithms work, I have to say, like, I'm not a computer scientist by trade, right? I'm an educator and I bring a humanities lens to this. I always say I bring a humanities lens to tech. So that idea that there is a probability to this is interesting. And I just want to share with you, there's a site called Novel AI, which I'm going to click on in just a moment. And it's a site that is used, folks who write fan fiction often use this site because you can put in a prompt and then it will expand your prompt for you, right? So I'm going to model it for you in a minute, but it also is a place where you can like store ideas about your characters. And what it also does is let you see the math that's happening behind. So it tells you how it came up with the words that it came up with. So I'm going to click on this real quick, go to Novel AI. I have created an account so that I can do this with you all. So I'm going to click on New Story. And if you're interested in this later, I'll slow down and show you what to do. And I'm going to say that my story prompt is a woman was in a webinar and asked people to rate their knowledge on, whoops, a scale of 1 to 3. And then I'm going to hit send and it'll just start writing. Oh, geez, I don't like what it's saying about me. All right, so I'm going to pause it. It says, and what it says is not actually that important, right? But it says, And a guy wrote 2.7 and she made fun of him, which did not happen, by the way. This did not happen this webinar. The webinar window glowed on her screen, a mosaic of faces and little boxes, right? And it goes on. So it can continue this. And then I can actually write some more in here and it can write some more back. What I like about this, though, personally, is there's this little brain button down here. And when you click on it, it shows you all the words that it wrote and it shows them all in different colors. And it's telling me the probability that that's the next word after what I wrote. So I wrote a woman did this webinar, and then it says the probability that and is the next word is kind of low. And I can click on it and it'll tell me what other words it like thinks it could have been. It could have been man, woman, bunch, person, lot. You can also turn it into the actual tokens. So this is what I find particularly powerful is that's how it's reading what I wrote. So I wrote in the words which you and I use to communicate, and it sees it in these series of numbers. It takes my words and it turns them into numbers because it has to calculate the next likely word that I might say after I wrote my sentence. And it can tell you, like, this is the likelihood that the word is A. It's 19.57% that the word would be then. It's only 4% that the word would be A. So like I like this because I can see it it made it very clear to me I'm not talking to this thing. Even though it talks back, we're actually not talking. It's translating everything I say into these tokens, and then it translates them back into the language I use with it. And you can actually do it on the screen too. So I could see screen had a 71% chance that screen was going to be the next word there. Third had a 5.85% chance, and you can actually change it. So if I choose a different word, it rewrites the story using that word. And what it allows for, I think, to share with students and for me is that this is a machine that just wants to give me either the most likely word, or if you're a writer and you want it to feel like a little looser, like a less likely word. And you can change all of that. And that is how it is deciding, like, what to say. And so it can be a better predictor if it has even more information, right? So the more words it has, the more times it sees sentences, the better and the cleaner its 71% or its 4% can be accurate. And that for me was really important and helpful. And maybe you're like, oh, Maria already told you I was a 2 or a 3. I got that. I know this. But for me, this was particularly helpful and helpful with students too, to say, like, look, you're not talking. It's doing something totally different than what you do when it comes up with words. So we've got that in our brain. We know a little bit about how it's working, like that it's this probability machine. So together with my students, I think about how can we make agreements about when to use this probability technology and when not to? What does it mean to think with this machine? And one of the tools that I use to do that is something that I call it a technology audit. And I actually did not make that word up, or those series of words. It comes from a methodology in social science, which is audit methodologies. And social scientists use this to kind of uncover hidden biases by highlighting their real world effects by asking questions. So, like, to gauge the impact of something on people, particularly people in if it impacts people in disparate ways. And science and technology scholars have taken this tool, for instance, like Dr. Ruha Benjamin, she talks about tech equity audits. And Meredith Broussard talks about algorithmic audits. And Joy Buolamwini, she used evocative audits in her research, which she calls an approach to humanizing the negative impacts that can result from algorithmic systems. And so in my own work, I've used audits both as a research tool and as a way to think with students or with other educators about, like, trying to figure out the impacts of a technology before I might use it and see if it's what I want to use. So thinking with that, I have some questions that we'll kind of work through a little bit together, that I'll share with you. So one of my first questions is, knowing that this is a probability machine, what does it mean to think like or with the machine. So with students, right, um, who often I don't know. I don't. I'm going to assume things are the same at your university as mine. We are having lots of wonders about the ways that AI should be used, or whether students should be, or if they are using AI, and whether that is a violation of our honor code, or whether that's really a thing that's actually helpful for them. And so, kind of going back to my first, we begin with teaching. I try to think through this with students. So once we understand that it's this probability machine, then one of the questions is like, what does it mean if you're thinking like a probability machine? And this question comes a little from Neil Postman. He has a talk called Five Things We Need to Know About Technological Change, and he gave this talk in 1998, so well before uh, large language models, right at the cusp of the internet kind of becoming popular. And he said that embedded in every technology is a powerful idea, or sometimes even two or three powerful ideas. And they're often hidden from our view because they're somewhat abstract in nature. So I think about the ways that large language models are a probability machine, but it's hidden, right? We don't see that. We think of it as like a word machine, right? A language machine, a thing we ask questions to and chat with. Um, and he continues, he says, like, for instance, perhaps you're familiar with the old adage, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we can extend that truism to a person with a pencil, everything looks like a sentence. To a person with a TV camera, everything looks like an image. To a person with a computer, everything looks like data. Um, and he says, uh, perhaps a television person values immediacy, not history. And computer people, what shall we say of them? Perhaps we can say that the computer person values information, not knowledge, certainty, not wisdom. Indeed, in the computer age, the concept of wisdom may vanish altogether. So the idea is that embedded in this, the technology makes us use our minds, it makes us do something with our bodies. It like codifies the world in a particular way. It influences our emotions and our tendencies. It nudges us towards certain things. So, a machine that turns all of our words into numbers and calculates a probability and then turns it back into words has kind of a hidden way of thinking about words. It has a hidden way of thinking about creating language. And my wonder for students is like, that's the way that you want to talk because it's a bit flattening, right? To find just the next average answer. Like I don't want you to be the next, I don't want your writing to be mid. I don't want your thinking to be mid, just most average. I ask like, how might that flatten our language? And how could that flatten your thinking, right? To have your words turned into a probability to be spit back at you. And I don't, I feel like I sound melodramatic here, but I'm always, thinking about democracy and dreaming of freer futures, like more just futures. How does this flatten our ability to imagine or to dream or to vision? Like, I don't want to dream the next probable thing. I want to dream improbable things. And I want my students to be dreaming improbable things. And so when we use generative AI often to write, like, are we doing that? Or is it opening us up, right? So what I just showed you, that novel AI, it's actually like got all this really cool stuff it can do. So I can start to store characters in there. Like maybe I want a character named Lee Wolf, who is just this really fascinating professor who really particularly loves chocolate ice cream. And so whenever I put Lee's name in, it talks about the things that I've already told it about her. And so it can add that in. So it can like add characterization in. And then again, you might be thinking, hi, I am a writing or English professor, and characterization is really important. And I don't want a machine doing that for my students. So I don't know. I'm not here to say we should or should not use this, but I think what we should do is think about what it can do and what it cannot do. The other things that I've linked on here, and I'll share um, the link to this slides. All these images are linked out. One of these is from Dr. Erin Rose Glass, and she presented at our Civics of Tech conference year, and she did a talk. She has a PhD in English literature, and she talked about the ways that ChatGPT is not embodied, and so it can't like enjoy language. It can't revel in poetry. It can't say Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers and like the way that that makes your lips feel or your body feel. It doesn't have that. Um, and so I think the question is kind of coming back to our educational aims, like what is the point of writing in our class? Do we want it to be fast? Do we want it to be creative? Does it depend on the type of writing we're asking our students to do? Does it depend on how much experience they already have with it? I do not have the answers to these questions. I just have a lot of questions, which I like to explore with my students because I prefer to kind of create boundaries around AI together. And so think about like, what's it actually doing? And I also want to create a sort of habit of mind for them to be asking questions and thinking like, is this a thing I want to invite into my life? What does it do or undo for me? Um, then ask, okay, so what does it mean to think like a machine that has been fed a massive diet of often stolen language from the internet? So whose histories and whose languages are being privileged? When we're averaging out our ideas through probability, it's actually not our ideas, it's someone ideas that have been fed into this machine. So whose ideas are being privileged, whose languages or ideas are being lost, what metaphors and values that are encoded into, if the majority of large language models use English, what are encoded into the English language or the Anglophone world that we're repeating over and over at scale when we use this machine. So one of the things we think about is the ways that the data itself, the companies that are doing this are like desirous of vast amounts of data, right? The probabilities only get more, only increase in their accuracy with more data. And so the companies themselves are sort of hungry for this and taking it from both freely accessible and places that people thought were more protected. And so that's one of my links here. And the other is that there are certain languages, particularly languages that are at risk already of fading out of existence because of colonization, because of the small population of people that speak that language. When there's both pros and cons of your language being encoded into the machine. So it may be that your language can be part of this conversation. It also may be that now a company has your language and is benefiting and making money off of your language being encoded. So again, just this question that I ask with students about like, how do we feel about this? How is this influencing us? What decisions are we making and what might we be overlooking when that is what feeds the machine that we're using to ask to make probability and predictions for our words or our images or whatever else we're using it for. I also think about the cost to power that, right? So we know it needs a huge amount of data that to then do the very difficult calculations, actually, right? It's a series of like complex matrices to come up with that. The next best word actually a very complicated calculation. So we've thought about the implications on our own thinking as individuals. We think about what we give up in our thinking. We think about what it might mean for like us as a society or democracy or people whose ideas get privileged and whose don't. And then there's also this material cost of like to this cloud, right? We call it a cloud, but that word makes it seem like these numbers are floating around in some ethereal something, right? The cloud, it just floats around us, but it's actually very structural. It requires raw materials, rare minerals, big data centers, water to cool the data centers, unless you're in a cool location like perhaps Dublin, right, where all the data centers talk about using air to cool their data centers there. And I'll say if this is a thing that makes you, if you're curious about that, Kate Crawford's book, The Atlas of AI, is a great just overview of the material cost of AI in the world. And so a couple examples I have of this are this Google has their own website where they talk about their data centers. And I feel like this, for me, it just like gives away the game right away. So they say if you visit their website, you can Google and data centers. They discover where the internet lives. We own and operate data centers around the world for this purpose, to keep our products running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like that's why they've got them everywhere, right? So if it goes down somewhere, we can pick it up somewhere else. And if you go to what they say about Dublin, because they have a map and you can click in, right? So you can go to what they say about Dublin. And here is what they say about Dublin, that this is how they measure their investment, Dublin by the numbers. So in 2011, they build and purchase their first. And then the one thing they have on their page, which is really weird to me, is that we placed a mural on one of our Dublin data centers. And that's their thing that they show. And I was like, oh, I was expecting like, and we also invested in the community by doing XYZ. So this is to me interesting. And then like it ends in 2014 when they announced the construction of a second data center. But I think that, and you all are probably living this. I mean, I'm living data centers here as well. I live near what's called Data Center Alley in the United States. But that, for instance, in Ireland, data centers are consuming more than 20% of the country's electricity. Um, and that in 20 that there's been a halt to new data centers near Dublin until 2028. So perhaps like Google hasn't updated that because they can't right at the moment. So I my note to myself is like, where is this on Google's measuring their investment by the numbers? But what I have done with my students is there is also actually pictures of the data centers. And so we'll pull up some so here in the US, we are not green and full of water in many places. And a lot of our data centers are being built in very arid, hot regions. And so we'll pull up pictures that Google has and and I'll do like a what do you notice, what do you wonder? And I'll share the picture and I'll ask my students, what do you notice about this picture? And they just start to describe it. And then what do you wonder about this? And what might the implications of this be? Um, the data centers, of course, are not the only thing, right? The environmental impact of this. Those materials have to be extracted from the earth. And although this talks about cobalt for rechargeable batteries, like in electric cars and in solar panels that have to store their energy in batteries, cobalt's also really important in the chips that are used to do the calculations to give us the next best word. And cobalt is often mined out of Congo, which is a region which has long experienced horrible colonialism and extractive labor and extractive practices towards the earth there. So like there's also all of this going on. So one of the conversations that I also have with students is like, so what's our level of commitment to this? When I make a choice about using AI, and look, I mean, there's cobalt in my phone. There's lithium in my phone. Oh, you can't see it. They're right there in my computer. My shoes, I'm sure, were made in a country with extractive labor practices. I am not saying that we're all making, or that any of us can make perfect choices about how we like make ethical choices. But we know that some of these are particularly harmful. And like we're right on the cusp right now about how we choose to do this. So I think we still have opportunity to kind of shape and make our own choices really intentional. So we talk about that. And then, so we've got like impact on our thinking, impact on our environment, impact on potentially democracy and society and injustice. But one of the things I worry about too, or think about with my students, and I just kind of want them to be aware of, is the ways that like we can conflate artificiality and humanity. Chatbots are really good at chatting. They're very seductive. And they're also very like sycophantic, right? They're always telling me how smart I am and what a good question I had. And would they like me to also find restaurants for the area I just looked up? They're extraordinarily helpful. And that's not new, right? Over 50 years ago, Joseph Weizenbaum, who he developed a chatbot, he called it Eliza, and all it did was repeat back the last phrase, basically, that people put in it. And he was dumbfounded that people would anthropomorphize like they knew. It's just giving you back the last phrase. And they still felt like this thing cared about them. And so he ends up spending the rest of his career kind of cautioning against the perils of believing that AI is equivalent to human in interaction. So I ask, like, what do we give up when we confess our thoughts to a machine, and a machine that records them and uses them to inform the way it talks about us? And I actually don't have this on the slides, but one of the a great stress right now in the United States is the ways that our democracy is not functioning, right? That our Congress has an inability to enact laws. It has not, it just comes to a grinding halt, and an ability to the people here to speak with each other. Um, Democracy requires that we tolerate friction. It requires that. It requires that we sit with discomfort and we like navigate through it. And AI bots that are like so smooth, right? And get us everything we wish and require we don't need to speak to an uncomfortable human, but rather a machine. It atrophies our skill to sit in friction, right? It, and particularly where I live, but really all over the world, as we have like this, rising fascism, we need to be able to develop those skills of sitting with discomfort and how we do that. And so I worry as one of my side worries on top of my top level worries is the ways that we eliminate friction when we use machines and technology in lieu of being with other humans. But back to this, Sam Altman also he created ChatGPT, and in a recent podcast with Theo Vaughn, this was probably like I want to say like 4 or 5 months ago, he said people talk about the most personal shit in their lives to ChatGPT. Altman said people use it, young people especially use it as a therapist, a life coach, having these relationship problems and asking, what should I do? And right now, if you talk to a therapist or lawyer or a doctor in those problems, there's legal privilege for it. There's doctor-patient confidentiality, there's legal confidentiality, whatever. And we haven't figured that out yet for when you talk to ChatGPT. So this is like the guy who created it was like, I don't know how to protect you. If you are saying, I have this serious concern, I have a mental health concern, I have a legal question, and I can't afford a lawyer, but I'm going to ask you. None of that is privilege, right? It can all be subpoenaed, it can all be accessed. There is no protection to it. Um, and I think also, like I always go back to remember the probability machine. It's not a therapist, it's not a teacher, it's not a lawyer. It does not give a hoot. It's just trying to come up with the answer that makes the most sense that that's it, right? Like that's what it's doing. Um, and so there have been some really uh, horrible end results of this as well, including, the ways that kids have harmed themselves because they have been in conversation with something that is not actually a therapist, right? And is not taking care with them. Here in the US, in 2023, our Surgeon General at the time said it is a public health crisis, our epidemic of loneliness, that people feel so alone that it is actually impacting the health of our entire country. So, like thinking about all those things and all of those implications, like what does that mean about how I want to use this? How do I need to set up my own guardrails? How do I need to advocate for sort of policy level guardrails or institutional guardrails? So I don't actually know the answers to these. So when I come back to like, should we think with machines or should we trust machines or I don't know. I know. I mean, I do sometimes, right? I think with I think with the machine. I use it in my life. I use it sometimes in my teaching. I also choose not to use it at other times. And I work with students to kind of together craft class agreements about when we might or might not, and then absolutely should not use AI. So I use a stoplight approach, like this is a red, do not ever use. This is a yellow, like proceed with caution. And this is a green light, we can use it for this thing. So we think together about like, what are the educational aims of this assignment? What am I hoping to learn from this? Will using generative AI disrupt that in some way, or will it support it in some way? Or is it like unclear, proceed with caution? And so we try to each time think about what are the boundaries we should put around it. And the reason I do that is because, like coming back to this quote, right? I actually ultimately want students to leave my classroom with the ability to do this, not just for learning in my class, but like across their lives, right? This is, for me, I I don't love the narrative of inevitability that like AI companies say, right? This is going to be the next thing, and you've got to get on board because if you don't, you won't be ready for what's coming next. I don't agree with that. I do believe that it exists and it will continue to shape our society. And so I feel a deep obligation to prepare students for a world that is going to look different. And I want them to have like the best life and the most just world in that space. And so I want them to develop like habits of mind about how to be in that world. And so the reason I keep coming back to this is like asking questions and teaching is because I think that is what I hope to develop with them is their own ability to ask those questions. Um, and so one of the ways that the book that I just had out has a sort of series of different classroom activities that you can do in the second half, and not just within your classroom, but also we talk about ways that you can make change through your pedagogy and through community and at institutional levels, institutional choices through the Civics of Technology project. I'm checking my time. Yes, we're good. There's resources there too, which I would love to take a moment to just click through and share with you. There, we have a whole curriculum page. Um, and so, for instance, the technology audits, this series of questions, you can do this in lots of ways with your students or yourself. And so if you go to our audits page, we have like the steps to conduct it. Here's how you could do it. And then we have a whole series of different types of audits that come at different kinds of questions. So do you want to talk about the ethics of this? Then maybe these are the questions you want to ask. If you want to think about, is there discrimination embedded in this design? Then maybe these are the questions you want to ask. If you're into the Neil Postman delightful grump that he is about technology, here's 5 questions based on his talk. So we have a whole bunch of different questions, and then actually as well worksheets if you click through that are aligned if you want to do it that way, right? And then we also have examples of the ways that either we've done this or we've seen other people use audits. And then, of course, the audits aren't the only one. There's a whole bunch of different activities here that you can click through and find. I really like, we have these critical technology quotes and critical AI quotes. They're just quotes from people across time, right? For the past century and a half, talking about technology and like getting the idea is to like get folks thinking about technology in their lives. So lots of different activities there. Um, and then let me click us through. And oops, sorry. Uh, I'll say that the last thing that I like to do, and this is another thing that I use with my students, is that we always use this AI disclosure. And I borrow slash adapted this from Tom Mulaney, who wrote a blog post for us, Civics of Technology project, and it's called From Fanboying to Thinking, My Journey with Ed Tech. And he closed with a version of this, which I really like. And it talks about all the places that you might use generative AI in your thinking and whether you did or didn't. So I asked my students to do this too, right? I used it for this part, but I didn't use it for this part, or I didn't use it. So I didn't use it to think up the topic for this. I didn't use it to write an outline for us. I used this, I wrote the slides without generative AI. I do edit this with, the squiggles underneath for typos. I still might have some, is what I always say. Um, so I think coming to a good close, and I'll say, I already see that there are 9 things in the chat that I've not kept up with. But I really appreciate this time with you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Does that sound good, Lee? And then we'll open it up for questions. And maybe we can even start with some of those in the chat, although I'm not sure what they are. But thank you so much.